Hello and welcome to Dateline New Haven. I'm your host, Paul Bass, inviting you to look behind the headlines on the stories that make our community tick. Well, the headline these days is that it's a new day in politics, and we're lucky to have three people here who are leading the way. By a new day, I mean that generational change is taking place in state politics, local politics, and national politics. We're reading about it every day. We're trying to figure out how politics is changing, who's going to lead the change. And we have three people in the studio today who have been working on that. Young people who've gotten involved in politics, elected to office, and being involved in thinking about it, organizing people about where the Democratic Party should go, where our communities go, where American politics should go. Caroline Tamby Smith is an alder from New Haven, represents East Rock and Fairhaven.
That's right.
Is Goatville in there?
Yes, Goatville is in there.
I love Goatville.
Right in the middle.
And Caroline is also an organizer of a statewide group of young Democrats getting involved in politics. Also involved there is Anthony Afriye, who's a Stratford council person. He's 29 years old. He's already the chair of the council. He's involved with the group with Caroline, and Abdul Osman, who is a member of the Hampton Town Council. He got elected to it at 19 years old. He's an old man now, but how old are you now?
I turned 25 in
so he's now going to give you the perspective as an old man at 25 looking back what it was like to storm the barricades at 25 years old back in the day. Actually, before the pandemic. Right?
Oh yeah. Well,
like minutes.
Like right in the midst of it. Yeah.
I thought it was 2019.
No.
2021.
Yeah, 2021.
Okay, so we were
right in the midst.
We were in masks.
Yeah.
Let's say. So anyway, welcome, folks. Thanks for coming in. It's actually an honor to have you all in the. I've been watching all your careers and really impressed with what you folks are doing. And I want to learn from you today. So just more generally to start off, we're reading a lot about the change in politics. You know, the average senator's age has gone up from 53 to 64. The U.S. Senate in the last couple of decades. In the House, it's gone from 49 to 58. You know, we just had a 77-year-old Senate president step down, who've been in office since 1980. We have people running for office who have been there since well before you were born. What is going on now? What is the generational change happening?
Yeah, so in my opinion, I'd honestly say it's just the process of how we're getting young people to get civically engaged. When you look at the things that are thrown at us now, as soon as we get out of college, it's figure out how to get a job, figure out how to get stable housing, and then the cost of living expense of just trying to make day-to-day ends meet, and then Maslow's hierarchy of needs settles in. So a lot of our age groups, a lot of our contemporaries, when they look at politics, when they look about being civically engaged, is really low on the totem pole of how do I make time to do something that's not going to give me a return on investment right now. And that's the biggest divide that I see for our generation, is that people are not motivated enough to really step into the arena and fight for the issues that they care about so much while dedicating so much time for it, because it takes a lot of sacrifice.
But what is something happening that some people are starting to step up? And there's been a lot of attention called, David Hogan at the national level as a whole group, about we should really get rid of any older congressperson except Rosa DeLauro, because he feels like she's delivering for real. He made the exception in that case. But there is this movement of people organizing, saying that the people are staying in office for a very long time. Your generations haven't been represented, and that I'm picking up at least efforts by some people do something about them.
Yeah. I mean, I would say, in a way, it's kind of a symptom of some of like the inaction that I think younger people see on like key court issues that like matter to them, regardless of what level it's on. Where, of course, you know, you're seeing it in all of young folks, whether they're considerably young or not, because I know you have folks that are in their 50s that, you know, based on...
Are now considered the youngsters bouncing
exactly.
like the Chuck Schumers. They're talking, should Chris Murphy bounce Chuck Schumer because he's almost 80, right?
Yeah. Where, you know, I think you're seeing that as a result of people that like are struggling with, you know, issues around like student loans. And some of, you know, the campaign promises and like ideas that have been brought about, you know, and the things that we can do about that. You know, we have like a housing crisis that like affects, you know, anybody that is honestly younger than like 45.
Right. Yours is the first generation. Is it fair to say that there's no expectation that you're necessarily going to own a home or do better than your parents? Is that fair?
I mean, I don't know. Like I would like to think I would do well enough to. But that's like a reality, where like for like a big section of folks that like, you know, are within like my age range, there is that, you know, reality that, you know, despite all of their efforts that they may put in, we just have like an economic system that has gotten to a point where it is literally impossible for them to be able to grow up with the thought that they're going to be able to own their own home in a meaningful way. So, whether we're looking at that with like issues of like housing, higher education, also, let's not even look that far as much as the fact that just the experience of going to school is that much different, especially as, year after year, you see school districts that are, having a penny pinch in order to actually give kids like a quality education. So you have kids, like growing up with those experiences that, maybe are able to like reflect on that, and that inspires, in fact, the way that they like move in their engagement with politics. I just see it like as a function of the everyday lives that people are forced to live nowadays.
So do we see something different going on, Caroline? Do you feel that there's something different from 5 years ago, 10 years ago? And obviously you can't ever universalize about any group like of people age, but is something different happening now in generational politics from 5, 10, 15 years ago?
Yeah, I think there is. I think it's a change moment. But I think that age is certainly a relevant factor, but I think maybe similar to what Abdul's saying, I think it's a moment that's a real hunger for a more energetic, joyful, and rigorous Democratic Party that's building a deeper bench of younger candidates. And I actually think that there's a range of candidates, in some ways irregardless of age, that are able to really rise in this moment if they have a message of delivering, if they're leveraging their expertise to deliver and get the job done, if they're leveraging their energy to get the job done. But I think it's a more complex and rich picture than just age, and more a shift in a hunger for a Democratic Party that's doing things differently, that's addressing those issues at its core that Abdul's talking about, and leveraging a wide diversity of candidates to be able to tailor those needs to the community that they aim to represent.
And do people feel, younger people, that there hasn't been a place for them at the table? Because somewhat I hear is, these people have had these positions for 40 years, 50 years, and that's why we're not being heard. That's what the David Hogue thing's about. That's what some of these challenges are about. Is that a meaningful data point, or is that just certain isolated incidents?
Definitely. Definitely. I would say that that's like a decent part of it, where folks, see themselves as, A, not being like listened to, but like B, not even seeing themselves, seeing space for themselves in like political institutions, or feeling that it's not really like tailored to their needs, feeling that there is some sort of like dismissiveness of, their beliefs.
Well, I'm noticing, like, I don't know so much about Anthony's background, but I know the two of you with groups that weren't the traditional groups that were the entree to elected office, right? So a lot of people, not that people get involved with the Democratic Town Committee is the way they used to, right? And when you're at a convention, Democratic Town Committee doesn't deliver votes at a convention the way they used to. They don't have as many jobs that they can hold people to, but people are more than ever, I would argue, still involved in things. Like if you look at Caroline's social media feed, she's often talking to people who organize about reclaiming waterways or lands by the river or under highways, or get involved in biking and or arts, and like they're kind of independent. There seems to be this independent sector, and Abdul, you were part of Democratic Socialist America, which eventually culminated in Mamdani's victory. But back in 2021, you had a slate of 3 people. 2 of them were quite young, or all 3.
Oh, right? Yeah, all 3 of us.
And so that's a different kind of group that was really never a major force before in electing. Would you say that reflects a difference in how people are getting involved in things? Or
there's more mediums than ever, really, and ironically I would say that it's like as a result of like the failure of institutions building space for folks to do that, where I think history kind of tells this story pretty clearly, whether you're looking like at the United States or other countries, where political institutions don't build space for fresh young ideas, and sometimes it's not even just that it's young, but fresh ideas. People will build the tools to push their ideas, whether it's their own like organizations, institutions that come to be, whether you're talking about like a Democratic Socialist America, community groups, faith groups of all sorts. It's just something that I think has just been like is just a core part of how our society like functions, really. Not to get too philosophical here, but yeah.
And if you got, you've been reading the recent days about Democratic Party did a postmortem after 2024. They wrote a report, then they never released the report, and everyone thought they were hiding something. It turned out they thought the report wasn't very good. The guy didn't really do it. But if you had a synopsis of what you would have reported to the Democratic Party about what's gone wrong or what needs to happen to be a 21st century party, what would each of you have written?
Oh, that's a great question. Now, for me, I would have been the lack of vision. I think when we found ourselves in the last general election, we weren't forecasting to the America that we aspired to the fullest extent. We were just reacting to the momentary. This is the existential crisis, and we need to stop this existential crisis by any means necessary. But people want to hear about what we're going to do different, how we're going to execute different, and how those externalities are going to create positive impacts in all of these people's lives. And that's what you really wanted to hear in the Democratic message in the last general election. But again, we got caught up in the chaos and the misery, and that's something that I was really hoping that I would get from that synopsis, but I just got the Biden administration kind of just left Kamala at odds and just let her fend for herself. And that's the thing that I hope that the Democratic Party leaves back in that time, and we move forward in trying to figure out, we have to create a place where people can look at government and say government is working. I see the symptom of how Donald Trump aspired to the presidency is that people looked at him and said, this is a broken system and we need someone to fix it. And they looked at a private sector perspective of this person could come in and try to fix the mechanism. But we need, as the Democratic Party, need to really go back and check, how can we try to bring our progressive ideals back to the forefront? When you look at our party, it really started when the railroads were starting to connect America during the 19th century, because all these communities used to be in little islands. Once a railroad came, it opened up so much opportunity about access, transportation, but we were beholden to these robber barons. So they asked for centralized power in the institution of the government to come in and regulate these specific industries. And we did, and we empowered them, and that momentum moved us through the New Deal. We enacted big programs to take care of people that weren't able to take care of themselves. But then during the 1960s and 1970s, the establishment really took a hold. And we found people like Robert Moses, we found people like Robert McNamara that were suits and ties that were acting on how they believed the world should be thought. And that I feel like that's the schism. People saw that we created this centralized power, and the centralized power was doing something. But towards the later stages, that centralized power started to act on the interest of certain people. And that's what people attributed to the Democratic Party.
Well, one question is that a left-right divide, or is that a populist elite divide? Like, our Massey voters, like, obviously there are huge issues that Democrats aren't agreeing with Tommy Massey about. But when you watched I watched his full speech that night, and I noticed what they're trying to lay the groundwork for. Is there an overlap? Marjorie Taylor Greene and Massey are working with Roe kind of in California. Is there more of a populist versus elite politics emerging, or is there still going to be a fight over what that means?
Well, maybe I'd be curious, both your thoughts. Maybe this answers both that question you just asked and also your previous question around what would be the post-mortem that I would love to write. I think, one is just, and I don't think this is actually particularly complicated, even though it's actually really hard to do, which is one, a Democratic Party that addresses issues that make an impact on people's lives, full stop, which sounds not particularly groundbreaking, but it's pretty exciting when a candidate's actually able to do that. I think what's been really inspiring about Mayor Mamdani's administration is his focus on potholes, his focus on actually getting things done that make a demonstrative difference in people's lives. Before this conversation, we were talking about Willow Street and the milling and repaving of Willow Street because there's this one pothole, the first pothole. I was able to work with Director Siciliano to fill, 3 years ago. That's kept recurring back up on Willis Street, and posted a video because it's going to be a part of the milling and repaving list. And the excitement from individuals to see the city be able to fix a pothole that they think about every single day on their way to work is exciting. And I think too, given that, I think that it's a moment when I think people are really, really hungry to be engaged. I've heard this a couple times from a couple other folks that, it's a moment of tumult and a moment of despair. And I think that's true. I think it's a moment of a lot of fear and trepidation. But what I'm seeing, I'm curious your all's thoughts, is actually an incredible amount of excitement from young people, from older folks to get engaged. I was talking to a 76-year-old the other day who's like, maybe I should run for office. And I said, you should. Hell yeah. Let's go for it. If you have a vision for how you want to make a difference in your neighbors' lives, you should go for it. And I think, though, related to younger folks, and this would be the third part of the postmortem, is around what I said at the beginning around building a deeper bench. Like, given that hunger, given that there is actually, I think, a tremendous amount of interest for people to get engaged on a number of different levels, particularly in local government because of its direct applicability to our day-to-day routes to work and to school. I think, how can we be a party that is supporting younger folks and mentoring them to both be able to run and then eventually to legislate.
Well,
or
New
to
Haven,
govern.
you see people feel they're not involved when parties make endorsements. And maybe not matter so much. We have these conventions where it's kind of secret who are even the delegates who are voting last week on a state rep endorsement, but it really didn't matter because everyone has to run in a primary anyway. Are young people, you think, looking for different structures and institutions through which to get involved?
Yeah, I would say social media for sure. Like, it's been a third way that people have been able to tap into different channels, different like avenues, and just hear what people are saying about the issues that they care about. For example, I have a friend that really loves food policy, and she's trying to figure out sustainability models on how she can incorporate that at the local level, but she would have never tapped into that community had it not been for social media. So when it comes back to the party apparatus with what our Democratic town committees look like, I think that it goes back to both the points that my colleagues have said, that people are engaged. They want to participate in some way. It's just that the process and the structure that's laid out before us in our generation is kind of cumbersome because we have to get to know somebody on top of a hierarchy, and then we have to pay our dues to this person. But our generation doesn't want to wait. We just want to do.
And that's the thing. We're talking three people of that generation: Caroline Danby Smith, Abdul Osmano, and Anthony Afriye, who are local office holders who also have their eye on the big picture and got started early in this new generational politics and getting elected to office. You have a statewide organization that had a coming out event at Firehouse 12, Connecticut Young Democrats.
Yes, yeah. The Connecticut Young Democrats was a co-host with me, Anthony, and Josh Goldstein, who's a city council member in Norwalk.
How did that come about, and what is that group?
You know, as it goes, I texted Josh back in, I think it was November, and I said we should have a young electeds meetup in this state. And then texted Alan, who runs Connecticut Young Dems, and then we texted Anthony. And I think the real spirit and the spine of it was twofold. One is that I've been seeing, certainly across the state, a set of council members who are younger, who are really excited to make a difference in neighbors' lives, and who are excited to get things done and make government a trusted, rigorous force for good in people's lives. And I was excited for that group of folks to get together. But also to support younger folks who could then work in tandem with us or to be able to run for office on their own, as well as invite current established elected officials across the state. The governor was there, the attorney general was there, the controller was there, and other folks to create this moment of connection between those that are currently holding office and those that are interested in being involved in some way, shape, or form, and to acknowledge the role of both current elected officials and also ones that are excited to get their hands dirty and get their hands in the soil of this kind of work.
So reading about it during Chernecki covered it, it really struck me how this felt a little different from some other institutional generational challenges. Like, it seemed that the people organized, tell me if I'm wrong, we're really trying to respect their elders, saying we're getting involved and we want to learn from you and work with you, but also have a place at the table. And I could be wrong, but I felt like the older Democrats were scared shitless. I mean, the governor was there, the head of the state. I mean, everyone was there, and all they wanted to do was tell you how great they were. And I felt it was partly like, please don't knock us off the stage yet. And like, can we do this together? Am I wrong?
I would rather say that they were excited. They were excited to see young people in the room caring about the issues that they're fighting for every day, and to be able to fellowship with them in that forum was something that they wouldn't have missed.
Now, something that's interesting, I think there's a more underlying question here, is how do you go about bringing generational change? So when AOC knocked off an older and established congressman, they weren't in the same room saying, let's do this generational change together. When people are taking on Chuck Schumer and they want Chris Murphy there, or Murphy's in the room, but they're not saying, let's do this hand in hand. Although I would say that AOC actually does model working with older leaders, Ed Markey and even Nancy Pelosi, while taking it to them. But there are, like in Hampden, when you guys were on the council, that was a generational change. I mean, when you go even further back, when Josh Elliott kind of got the ball rolling and got rid of the House Majority Leader, been there a long time. Do you think, Abdul, that what is the line between taking on the older generation to grab a spot at the table that doesn't want to budge versus working collaboratively to bring about generational change?
I will say for a fact, we do tend to have just chippy fights in Hampden, regardless of.
That's true. It's not just generational, it's just Hampden.
There's never a primary season where there's not a primary in Hampden. But I'd say that I think what really defines when it's that time to take that challenge on is when that, older generation, probably doesn't have like the sharpness in policy that they should, or is like refusing to, acknowledge key core issues that like are important to you as a young person, or a younger person, whatever that those issues are to you. Not going to be purely prescriptive about that. And when you have someone that hasn't really put in that work of like actually building in a bench, or building or developing leaders.
So how do you feel about Congressman Rosa DeLauro?
Yeah,
is I believe 83.
Yeah,
and she's in the room when all the big decisions in the country are made, and she brings a lot of money here.
Yeah.
So David Hogo has this national group, basically saying pretty much anywhere where a Gen Z or a millennial wants to take on an old baby boomer, we're going to support you. He specifically said we're not going to do that in the 3rd district because she delivers. And I was at the DNC convention in Chicago, and she was sort of like hailed by all over the country, all these activists who said she's kind of shows us how it's done and she's still got her marbles. But, this guy, Andrew Rice, is not even supported by DSA, who's a socialist. He did a pretty good showing at the convention against her. I don't know if he's going to qualify primary, not primarily with the Israel issue, but also saying it's time for her to move aside. How do you see that race in the context of
I think that I see that race in his performance as a sign of someone, what it's possible even without like the institutional backing that we're like talking about, where I think he was like 6 votes short of like getting onto the ballot. I kind of see it as like a function of that we're in a time where there's such, hunger for, challenges, regardless of, what someone may have done in the past. Because I think at the end of the day, primaries are healthy. I don't think there's ever been a time that like, which actually I think there's only like 3 times I've been in primaries, that like I've ever seen it as like a inherently like bad thing. Of
right,
course,
it pushes
you got
everyone to find out. Like, let's look at the 92nd district state rep race in Westville. This is probably the best example of that, right? So Pat Dillon's in her late 70s. She's been there since 1984, but she has people really loyal to her because the work she's done over time. Eli Sabin is 26. He's making the generational change argument. There are no issues they're disagreeing about. At the beginning of the race, Pat Dillon was on TV and they said, "What have you accomplished?" She couldn't name anything from the century. Now, yesterday, her campaign knocked on my door and had a list of all these accomplishments. So obviously, to your point, a primary is giving everyone to up their game. What do you think about the generational change argument in that case? Like, when is it time when someone's leaving? When is it not? Like, Marty Looney stepped down. She didn't. They were the same age. Rosa DeLauro is not stepping down, but, other people say it's time to move on. What do you guys think? When is the time for them to step aside?
Yeah, I mean, for me, the race with Rosa is really simple. I'm a huge supporter of Rosa. I think that she has delivered for Connecticut, and I think she continues to. I'm also someone who is just a big supporter of someone who really looks you in the eyes and clearly cares. And Rosa cares. There's few people that care more about than Rosa, and few people that are able to build a better coalition to deliver on an extraordinary social safety net, food stamps, Social Security. I think she's a real inspiration. And I totally agree with Abdul that primaries are healthy. They allow us to all be able to step up, and it's a missed opportunity to be afraid of a primary.
Yeah.
And it's an opportunity to lean in. I think that's true in the 92nd. I mean, seeing that as an opportunity to be able to display, this is your vision. This is your vision for the district. This is your vision for what you want to do next. For all 3 candidates, I think each should see it as an opportunity and approach it with a large degree of humility and excitement for the work ahead.
There's another interesting issue in the Rosa case. So one thing that Rosa is the master at is getting as far as she can to deliver what she can and striking a deal. She's one of 4 people in the room, Democrats or Republicans, who decide what's going to be in the budget when a deal gets struck. So she gets a lot, and then they all agree to be for the deal. Then she gets slammed, like she did last time, for being for a budget deal that might have gotten us another $100 million here in New Haven, but had some parts that people didn't like. And more broadly, senators and congressmen especially, it's not as much on the state level, I think, are scared to actually craft compromises, make deals that do the best you can to advance your issues, because then they're going to get killed now with social media and activism that's based on what that one vote was. So is bipartisanship a dirty word? Is compromise a bad thing when you're legislating? Or do you think that, like, are people being held accountable now for not being true to their principles? Or are they being punished for trying to meaningfully legislate?
Honestly, I think at the end of the day, it's like, if you're afraid to get heat for something that you're doing and you don't trust yourself enough to be able to defend it, maybe this isn't the right line of work for you. To be like very blunt, I don't think there's a thing that I've ever done like that I've ever like felt like, oh, how am I going to explain this to somebody? I in fact overthink everything that I do.
And do you think voters in general are understanding if you come back and say, I actually agree with you that I didn't like that part of that bill, but I got 9 out of 10 things I wanted to do?
Yeah, I'm just like, the average person is like really reasonable, and I think that like if you have actually like talked to a person, you would know that. Where I think in like my like experience, like yeah, I'm like a ardent socialist, democratic socialist. I like talk to people about that. I've had people slam me on certain things that I've like voted on in the past, and I'll explain to them my rationale behind it. 9 times out of 10, whether they agree with me or not, we actually like leave with some shared common sense of values and like respect, because after all.
So your argument is that don't hide, let's talk it out.
Yeah, don't hide, just talk it out. And what, I don't know, like if 60% of the people like hated the decision that you made so badly that you now got voted out, well, that is just how democracy works. I don't know what to tell you.
Any other thoughts? Do you think that bipartisanship or governance is in danger?
No, I think it's a must. I actually want to talk about a societal thing based on what Abdul just said. So we used to have third ways in the United States. There used to be bowling alleys, there used to be churches, but we've seen the degradation of that. We've lost that, and a lot of people have fallen into these silos. And because they've fallen into these silos, now we're seeing like this prognosis into our politics where certain people in our population think that their politicians have to believe everything that they believe, or else they're not true believers in their causes and their beliefs. And I think that's the missed opportunity of the people that are elected. They're going there to really do what's best for the majority of people. And when you have to sit down with someone that has a different perspective, a different viewpoint, and a different lived experience, you have to find that commonality. And that's the beauty of a real like government work. And I think that's what people don't really get to see of the inner workings, because most of that work is done behind closed doors until the pageantry when you come onto the floor and you start debating. But I think that's what people really need to understand a little bit more about the process of how policy is made. And that falls onto the elected officials, that falls into the civic institutions, and that falls into our educational system to better educate our populace.
Civics, yeah, I'm a big fan of that. Civic education. We're talking to Caroline Tamby Smith, Abdul Osmano, and Anthony Afriye, 3 up-and-coming local elected officials who are thinking a lot and doing a lot about how politics is going to evolve, the Democratic Party is going to evolve, because they're all Democrats as we move forward in America. I want to ask each of you how you got involved in politics. What was the decision point at which you said, I'm going to run for office? And what did you think about what you wanted to accomplish and stay true to your goals, and how has that evolved since then? Why don't we start with Anthony?
So I graduated college 2020 during the middle of the pandemic. So I did not get to do a graduation. There was no job prospect for me because I was a liberal arts major. So my parents were like, yeah, this is going to be tough for you. The world's ending and you don't have a job, you don't have friends, and you're stuck inside the whole time. So I decided to do a service year for AmeriCorps and CCC. And I went away to the Southwest of the United States, and I did service work, building houses, helping with the COVID vaccination. I was a contact coordinator for the state of Colorado and Denver. But the moment that was an inflection point for me was I went to Louisiana after Hurricane Harvey in Lake Charles, and helping the Red Cross distribute necessary things that they needed. And at that time, we couldn't use shelters because of COVID. So we ended up renting out these 5-star hotels and delegating these rooms for these refugees based off of what happened at the hurricane. And when I was working, I saw this lieutenant that had served in Vietnam, and he pulled me aside and he said, you have a real affection for people. And I could tell that you're actually seeing them, you're being present, and you're trying to understand them. And he asked me what I wanted to do with my life. And I told him, I really just wanted to be a bureaucrat. And I
thought you wanted to be a soccer player. Major League Soccer.
In another lifetime. Okay. At that time, I told him I wanted to be a bureaucrat. I wanted to work at the Department of Transportation, be an urban planner. And he was like, Anthony, we don't find young people like you that are a person of color, articulate, educated.
You use the word articulate?
Yeah.
Oops. Was he white?
And no, he was actually an older black man.
Oh, thank God.
And he after that conversation, he actually opened my eyes that I can't be in the background. People like me, people that look like me, people that come from where I come from, they need to see that they also have space and that they can.
And you're in a town, Stratford, that has been evolving. It used to be pretty much all white town, and now it's almost half people of color, correct?
Yeah, you should look at our school, the population of our educational system, if you look at it, it is a majority minority population now, and it is trending that way for the next coming decade. So it is really interesting to see how Stratford has.
And you
been
came
evolving.
back from that kind of moving experience to Stratford, where you grew up, and you decided you're going to stay where you grew up.
Yeah, I love Connecticut. After seeing the whole Southwest, after traveling to the South, I realized Connecticut, you're able to do things within a 50-mile radius of go to New York City, go to Boston. I can hike mountains. I could go to the beach. If I want to go to the city, I could go to the city. It gives me everything that I need, and I was really invested in staying home.
So you got involved in politics. You worked for Rosa DeLauro on the staff while you went at night to school. That's always impressed me. You trained to New York, right, for your graduate degree.
Yeah.
But then you ran for the Stratford Council. You're in your second term, correct?
Yeah, this is my second term now, town council president.
Yeah. How did they pick the young guy to be the president of the council?
I made a hell of an argument. That's
What was your argument?
It was a unanimous decision, and I'm again, I think everybody's older than me by 20 years. And they could tell that the passion and the dedication that I have.
So when you came in there thinking about your idealistic goals, has there been a time where you found yourself saying, oh, to make this work? And Babs says, I love seeing these young leaders bright, engaging, and committed. I agree. Thanks. Thanks very much for listening to the comments. So has there been a time already when you work with people 20 years old and you dealing with the nuts and bolts, as Caroline said, pothole politics, has there been a time where you said, oh, I'm going to make a decision to make something happen that's more complicated than I originally thought when I came back from the Southwest and I took that guy's challenge?
It was this past municipal budget. At the early onset, we were dealing with the reevaluation, which was pushed back by a year. And we saw residential property values go up 80%, while we only saw commercial go up 20%. So there was a disproportionate average on how people were going to be taxed coming into the next year. Our grand list grew by around $2.5 billion.
Wow.
So
Stratford's happening.
It was an interesting, complex
It's not
situation.
just craft breweries.
No,
they do have the best craft brewery.
we do love Two Roads.
Two Roads is amazing. Yeah.
But long story short, going to the budget, how do you balance the needs of the immediate? We need to provide the services for all of our residents, support the Board of Education, but also be very considerate about how taxation is happening to our residents at the same time. And those conversations were probably the hardest conversations I've ever had in my life, because I'm fortunate enough where I was left the property due to my parents' situation, and I'm just a steward. But there are actual real homeowners that have invested heavily into their properties for decades, and they might be priced out. And how do you have that conversation of the decisions that we make?
So what did you do?
We compromised.
What was the compromise?
We phased in the reevaluation. So we're going to do it over 3 years. And in that time, we're going to try to understand the homestead exemption that the state has a general statute for, to see if we can implement it here in Stratford.
And how's the homestead exemption work?
So the homestead exemption is essentially giving us, the municipality, the ability to devalue home properties that are residentially owned by a certain percentage. So let's say that you had a $200,000 home before the reassessment and it jumped up to $360,000. We might be able to apply a 30% devaluation to bring that home down.
So somebody else is going to have to pay for that.
We are going to redistribute that amongst the whole tax proportion. So some of it will be commercial, some of it will be non-owner occupied residents. But that's what we're trying to evaluate now, to understand all the externalities, because we don't want anybody to not be seen, not heard, and not understood on how this is going to affect you.
And Abdul, when you got involved in politics, has anything changed in the 6 years you've been on the council where you said, I wasn't aware that I was going to have to make this decision that doesn't fit neatly into right and wrong, or might make a decision I might not have made at 19 or anything like that?
That's a good question. Only really because I started getting into a lot of this stuff when I was 14.
Tell me about that. What was going on at 14? 14, I had no idea how you voted for something.
No, I didn't really vote for anything. But I actually got into
watching TV.
I got involved in politics when I was 14. The story as I tell it is I was actually a very shy, drawn off kid, wildly anxious. In fact, I couldn't speak in front of a crowd of more than 10 people without
boy, that's not the Abdul I know.
Yeah, exactly. It's really funny how all this stuff happens. So I actually had Justin Farmer as well as Brad McDowell come to my
Hampton Council members
AP US government class. They were talking about local government, the idea of hey, you can just knock doors for a summer and talk to people about this stuff and whatever. And I don't even think I was inherently interested in getting involved in local government. I just thought it was a way to, learn how to talk to people and, get off of my couch for a summer So I decided to do it, and I somehow fell in love with like the minutia of like local government. So for 5 years, I pretty much like attended every town meeting that I could.
That's really interesting.
Was like hip to what was happening with like the DTC. Worked on like campaign after campaign, and just like grew like this like base of knowledge and like love for all of this stuff. And by the time I was 19, my councilman was not running for re-election, and I just figured like, hey, why don't I do this myself? Of course, I had to balance school, and then I also had like two part-time jobs that I was like balancing. But yeah, like,
and then you stayed not only in elected office, you were the campaign manager for Lehman Brennan's mayoral primary campaign in New Haven, and really I saw you use those skills on the doors that you got him on the ballot, which was a hard job.
Oh yeah, that was honestly one of my like favorite like, because we had to get, I forgot how many thousand signatures,
but the other candidates failed.
Yeah, which that also is a thing. I actually did for like quite a while, like do like quite a bit of campaign work, where I like have done political, like I've managed campaigns, I've deputy campaign managed. I like was a campaign consultant for a firm, where I was actually doing some early fundraising work on like the Mamdani campaign. At this point, at the age of 24, not to say that I've done everything, I've just left a lot of
Wait,
stones.
24 or 25?
24, turning 25 in November.
Okay.
I've left a happy amount of stones turned over.
Caroline, when we watched your career very enthusiastically here at the Independent, you've done so much to the community that was not electoral politics, but it had to do with all the issues that people deal with electoral politics from a community organization. You interned for the Stefan administration, City Hall, when you were a Yale student. You worked for C-Click Fix, was a cutting edge kind of information tech community site. You were the downtown Worcester Square management team chair, so you saw how neighbors dealt with the police, and you learned who everyone from the city was working and everything. You started Collab, which is this whole nonprofit that got, it's really amazing, man. I think we're 35?
I'm 33.
33. You started this thing that's going strong, that got all these people getting small grants and training to start their own enterprises at the grassroots level. You went to school management at Yale, where you spent your time learning how the city budget worked. And then you just, so what made you say you're doing all these things, you want to make difference, then you thought, I want to be an alder and run for office? Like, how did that happen? And were you concerned that you might sell out your principles by going from the outside to the inside?
Yeah, I first of all, that's very generous. I mean, Paul, you know my story. I've been here since I was 17. I've now been here for 16 years, a little over half my life. And the spine of my life is around love of place. I fell in love with New Haven. It's the city that took me under its wing.
That happened to me when I came to Yale.
Exactly.
Back in its Stone Age, yeah.
It's truly, besides my family, the greatest thing that's ever happened to me is finding a home here. And so that is the guide of my life, and has been the guide of my life for the last 16 years, and will continue for the rest of my life. And yeah, I don't actually know if you know this part of the story, which is that when I first graduated, Abby Roth was stepping down. I had written a paper about her first campaign.
7,
exactly. I'd written a paper about her campaign when she was knocking on doors in the snow for the special election. And she was stepping down. She asked if I would run. And I said no. And the reason why I said no is because I had only lived in the city for 5-6 years. I'm a deep believer that service is deeply connected to love. In fact, I think they're synonymous. And love is really connected to understanding. And to your point about principles, I just felt like I didn't know the city enough. And I have such a high bar and respect for what it means to serve this place and what it means to serve with integrity. I said no. And then a few years later, so Abby then re-ran for Alder a couple years later, and then actually stepped down again. And she asked if I would run, and I said no again. And I think that reason was for a less strong reason. I think it was because I had a high bar for what it meant to know enough, what it meant to know enough about the policy, what it meant to know enough about the budget. And so I said no at that time, and then thought about it, and I thought, if I were advising another young person in my shoes, or another young woman particularly in my shoes, I think I would have said you shouldn't let your knowledge be the thing that's standing in the way if you feel like you have a strong spine and set of principles. And so I made a commitment to myself that if the sort of stars aligned to have the opportunity to run for Alder occurred again, that I would say yes. And that's why a big part of why I organized Ready to Lead, that invited a lot of young women. It was a sort of follow-up to the meetup that you mentioned earlier in the conversation, was because I think, especially for young women, this idea of what it means to be ready, I think is something that we should encourage young women to say, you are ready. But what I would say is that it did take me time, to your point about principles, to feel like I could go into one of these roles that sometimes are kind of unfair. Sometimes you have to say yes or no, and you can't talk to every single person about why you made the call you did. That I would not be a reed in the wind, that I would have a strong spine, and I would have the will.
Has that been tested?
Yes.
Give me an example.
I think a number come to mind. I think a couple things come to mind is that me and a group of alders have been very passionate about accountability and transparency with the Board of Education. I think multiple things can be true at the same time, that our public schools need to be fully funded by the state, the ECS formula. These are all the things that we know has not changed since 2013, and we can be more effective stewards of every single taxpayer dollar. And we can build a coalition.
It's kind of an incredible understatement. They couldn't tell you in the budget, the Board of Ed, they're admitting this. They couldn't tell you how they're spending their money. They couldn't give you a report. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. And then I think also Best City to Start has been a really exciting.
And that's where you've organized. Again, you've seen your position as sort of a community organized business. You got small business people encountering problems because of red tape, getting businesses started, got them a coalition to work with the city and how to make it easier to start small businesses.
That's
in
right.
Haven.
And saying that the Democratic Party can be the party of small businesses, that we can be the party of making government more efficient, more operationally sound. And that, in fact, I'm a believer that the Democratic Party, as the number one party to invest in our social safety net, as FDR said, we can be the party of the worker, of the farmer, of the small business owner, that we can return to that we can be a party that invests in our social safety net, and as a result, creates the conditions for a thriving, inclusive small business economy to occur. And I think some of the most interesting ideas of the next 5 to 10 years will be ideas that blur boundaries, blur traditional political boundaries, and have less intuitive policy outcomes as a result.
That's interesting. We're talking to Caroline Tamby Smith, Anthony Frier, and Abdul Osmanu, or New Haven, Stratford, and Hamden Council members with a big future ahead of them. Quick poll. So Josh Elliott is taking on the governor in a primary, Democratic primary for governor. He's one of the most popular governors in the country. He's kind of a moderate Democrat, a little bit of the old Weicker Republican mold, who's his model for governor.
He's a little less moderate than folks.
Well, he's like, we used to have Weicker likers, they call them nationally, kind of Democrats who are fiscally conservative and liberal on social policy. And he says Weicker is his model as governor. And Elliott is running from the left, saying we should tax the wealthy more. That's a central issue, and not rely so much on the property tax. And take more activist stance. And he says he's not bringing up the generational issue, but he's 41. Lamont's in his 70s. Where are you guys standing on that race, and why? Just real quick.
I'm standing behind Governor Ned Lamont. I think he's done well. In 8 years, he's been able to raise the minimum wage. He's really put into the early child care endowment. He's really put a focus on how can I get young people to stay in Connecticut. And you don't hear that a lot from politicians, but yet he's created the Time to Own program. A $25 million bond investment to try to get home ownership to happen. So I do believe that the governor has tried his best with every tool that he has at his disposal, working with the supermajority to create the avenues for real social mobility. And I think in the next term, we will see that continue to actually happen.
Abdul?
I'd say Josh Elliott. Only really as like I said, primaries are very healthy. I think that with this campaign, Josh, brings like a really interesting opportunity to give a vision of change that pushes the governor a little bit in a way that I'm not sure that we've like quite seen. Where yes, our governor has passed like quite a bit of things. In fact, this year he actually came out in support of just cause evictions, which didn't make it past the finish line. But behind the Elliott campaign, I see, quite a lot of deep conversation about, what municipal ownership of utilities looks like. We talked about taxing the rich. I can probably tell myself pretty assuredly that is something that might not quite happen, with a Lamont governorship or whatsoever. So I think I find myself supporting Josh Elliott really as he brings quite a lot of ideas that, whether he wins or not, I want, coalitions, left and labor coalitions, to really be able to push, because these are the affordability issues of our time that we love to talk about.
Caroline?
I ended up voting for Josh at the convention. I thought about it for a long time, and what I kept returning to is progressive tax reform. Right now, so tonight is our special budget meeting for the Board of Alders, and we're facing this really tough and almost seemingly impossible choice, which I would push was, things that we as the administration, the Board of Alders, could have been able to also mitigate over the last few years. But at the end of the day, we are in a case where we are run out of ARPA dollars. Our transportation,
that's pandemic relief funds.
That's right.
Yeah.
Our transportation budget, as you mentioned before, for our public schools is multiple billion dollars over budget. And as a result of getting a $23 million from the state, we still might have to raise taxes. And when I think about from a structural perspective, what needs to be true in order for that to be different across all of Connecticut, we need to rethink our tax structure. And so I'm excited about a candidate, any candidate who's thinking very seriously about how we're funding our local municipalities, says they're not caught in this decades-long bind of being able to provide quality services while mitigating taxes for our hardworking neighbors. And so whatever candidate is thinking about that in a real serious, rigorous way, I think is the exciting candidate over the next few years.
All right. So thanks so much for sharing. I think everyone is listening to this, and I know I'm getting such a lift. I feel good about the future, being in a room with you folks. So what is in your folks' future? Do you see yourselves continuing local elected office? Do you see yourselves running for higher office? How's that decision going to be made for each of you?
I'll jump into this first. I'm really focused. I think that we have a problem, and I'll use housing as an example. If you live in an affluent neighborhood and there's a development that's coming in, there are certain people that will say that I don't want this, and they'll use a tool to automatically create a veto. But at the same time, on the flip side, if you live in a less proportionate neighborhood and there's a development coming in, you use that very same tool to say a veto that I don't want this to go in. I think my next adventure is trying to figure out how can we try to streamline the process of, we need good development to happen, but we also need voices to be heard, but it's not an automatic veto. And I think that's part of the Democratic Party's issue, is we're trying to be in a dualistic mind of having a Hamiltonian approach towards certain issues and then also having a Jeffersonian approach towards certain issues. I see climate change and I see AI regulation as a Hamiltonian approach. But when it comes to healthcare, and specifically for women in this world, I think that's a Jeffersonian approach. So I think that's something that I'm
So
really
do you
focused.
self-seeing a career in elected office? Do you self running for higher office?
I mean, if people like me enough to keep voting for me year over year, I'd love to keep running.
Abdul? You've
You've
already tried for state rep.
Yeah, which that was interesting. Totally came from like out of left field. I think for me, I am happy doing the work that I do right now. There's a lot of stones left unturned, and I'm already happy, being able to see I have friends such as Jalen Daniels and Ansonia, who, someone that's told me he ran for office because he saw the work that I did. I know Matt Plord, once upon a time, Newington councilman, told me that he saw the work I did and inspired by that. So far as I keep inspiring, I'm happy where I am, because there's a lot of work left to do.
Caroline?
I want to and aim to be in New Haven for the rest of my life. And I think the most important gauge for me is do I continue to be an individual who has a strong spine, who is honest, and who is, like so many of the elected officials I admire, have the ability to incur cost as a result of making the right call. And if that continues to be true, then I'm excited to continue to serve.
All right. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to get together. I love seeing the three of you in the same room. And thanks to Harry Jose behind the controls, as always. We're going to take it out, the Afro-Semitic Experience, performing I Wish I Knew How It'd Feel to Be Free, from the group CD, A Plea for Peace. This is Paul Bass inviting you to fly free with us all day and all night long at WNHH, New Haven's home for community radio.